Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week, we're talking with developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week, I'm joined by Gary Simon, founder of DesignCourse.com, designer extraordinaire, guitar virtuoso, and just amazing all-around expert on freelancing, on web design, on using contemporary tools, just getting things done. And he's got like more than 1 million YouTube subscribers on his channel. He's been at this for a very long time, and he's carved a path for himself. And I think there's a great deal we can learn from him. Gary, welcome.
Thanks for that awesome intro.
Yeah, we're so thrilled to have you here, man. I'm a long-time admirer of the work you do, the production of the videos, the level of insight, just, you know, how it's great watching you do like a teardown of a website and like look at like the different design decisions that were made.
Yeah, thanks. No, and the feeling's mutual, of course. I mean, 9 million subscribers on YouTube. I mean, you can't beat that. So, yeah, I'm very excited for this, to have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want to start off by just talking, like, a lot of people have heard the term web design. It used to be the main term that people talked about in terms of getting things on the web. Now you heard the term web development, but but web design and web development are kind of two distinct disciplines that, you know, web design still exists. It's completely different set of skills, right?
Right. So like back in the day when I started, maybe we started, you know, it was like in the early 90s to late 90s, and we had the term webmaster back then. So I was like a webmaster, I think, and I think that's the term I used. I called myself a webmaster, even though and I was doing design and code back then. But for me, web designer, the way I give that definition, it's essentially somebody who's dealing mainly with the aesthetics, and if to break that down more specifically, you could say UI, UX designer. For me, web development is a term that could possibly include web design or the design aspect, depending on who you ask. But for me, if I'm talking about development, I'm probably talking about front end development and back end and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, aesthetics. How would you define aesthetics? And as like let's pretend. Okay, there are probably a lot of people listening to this who don't even have, you know, the faculty of sight. Like we have a lot of blind people in the FreeCodeCamp community. Like, how would you describe aesthetics?
Well, unless I'm wrong about the definition of aesthetics, for me, it would be the visual aspect of building, you know, a digital product like a website or an app or a SaaS, you know. And so the tools for that for me would be Figma, perhaps. So when I say aesthetics, even when I'm referring to like bodybuilding, I'm saying, what does that look like? So for me, if I'm talking about the aesthetics of a website, I'm talking about the visual aspect. I'm not sure if that is consistent with the correct definition, because I know you precluded that by individuals who can't see or have a hard time, you know, seeing a website. But that's how I traditionally have approached that definition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How did you build up your sense of aesthetics over the years?
Right. So I've been designing for a real long time, and I've always been artistic. I like to draw as a kid, you know, not to say that you have to be artistic for UI design, because you don't have to be. But for me, you know, I've always, you know, we could talk about this a little bit more down the road, but, you know, in the mid to late 90s, I was just fascinated by early computer graphics back then, like Photoshop 2.0 had these lightning bolt strikes and stuff. And in terms of developing my current taste and how it's transformed over years and such, that's just a matter of experience. You know, once you start playing around with things and building things, designing things, you'll develop your own sense of what makes you tick. You know, I'm a big fan of like minimalism, but also sci-fi, and so I kind of work that sometimes where appropriate, but I like that sort of stuff. Just kind of like we all have our own musical tastes, you know, in terms of design, we can also have our tastes as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's talk about those early experiences.
Oh yeah.
With computers, because I know you're like a big fan of kind of like retro computing aesthetics, and you know, there's a great video that I'm going to link to in the show notes. I'll be linking to a lot of the things that Gary brings up during this conversation, but it's like right before the year 2020, and it's just Gary jamming out on the guitar with this really cool kind of like, I mean, if anybody's seen the movie Kung Fury, like it's just got that kind of like dusty, smoke-filled, dark kind of like
Cyberpunk,
old school computer.
right.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I can't wait to utilize the new studio to do more crazy stuff. But yeah, we'll talk about that. But yeah, how I got started with computers.
Yeah, well, I mean, you grew up in Ohio?
Yes.
Yeah, which is in the middle of America, pretty much. Like
it's northeastern.
Northeastern.
Yeah, it's right attached to the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, and yeah.
Yeah, so like a lot of people have probably not been out there. Like I've never been there.
Yeah,
but
it's
what is it like? Is it like
it's just like it's a rural, and I've only lived like within a 10-mile radius my entire life. I've probably been 4 or 5 places, but it's very like where I live now. I mean, it's like I have a horse farm across the street. My neighbors are far away. I have 8 acres. That's what we like, my wife and I. We did live in the city, and of course, it's not a big city. There's like 36,000 people there. Yeah. But people were just close together, and I like having space, and that was kind of how I grew up as well early on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as listeners to the show know, I grew up in Oklahoma City, and it is similar. Like it's just like less dense, right?
Right.
And yeah, you would drive on your way to school. You might drive by an actual farm.
Right? Oh yeah. Yeah, I run past them all the time.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk about those early days, like what you were into as a kid. I mean, you mentioned you drew a lot.
Yeah, I was into art. I was also into baseball. I was a pitcher, and I played all the way up until about 8th grade, and I stopped because I became too obsessed with computers. And so I ran, and I was athletic, and then I wasn't. Because the computers took over. Yeah. And my first introduction to computers was my friend actually. He showed me AOL on his computer. We didn't have a home computer, and I was like, "What is this?" And it was dial-up. We didn't have cable modem back then, and I just thought it was amazing. These private rooms, everybody talking with each other. So I begged my parents for a computer. And they bought me a nice computer. It was like $2,000 back then, and and I started getting into that. And then I started playing Doom. My sister's boyfriend brought over the 5 hard disks of Doom to install Doom 2.
The floppy disk. You had they had this cool like DOS interface where it would show the progress bar.
And so I played that, disc. And then I realized you can actually make levels. And so that's my very first taste of any type of development. Creating things on the computer was making Doom 2 levels. It had their own little apps and stuff, and it was complex too. It was hard, and then I got into AOL a bit more, creating programs, progies as they were called, very irritating things where you could kick people offline and freeze their computer, and I just thought that was the funnest thing to do to my friends. And in order to do that, you had to learn Visual Basic. And that is my first step into actual development of any sort. And that's hardcore desktop development. I had to learn it. And I learned Visual Basic API programming. And it was just something that a 13, 14-year-old's doing. It's like, what is happening? Yeah. And I learned a lot from that. Yes, I learned a lot from that because basically these little progies, as they were called, or progs, they were separate desktop applications that you ran on your computer, and you click buttons, and it would literally control the interface of AOL. So if you had a friend's screen name and they were online right now, and you wanted to freeze their computer, you could send this IM spam to them automatically, and it just froze their computer. And we just thought it was hilarious. But in doing that and being a terribly annoying teenager. I learned how to code, actually, and I liked it. It was fun and challenging. Shortly after that is when I started designing web pages, and that was kind of that. I left that stuff behind, fortunately, and I got into designing web pages. Yeah,
I remember back in the day. I think my friend had something called AOL.
Oh yes, yes.
That's one of the little scripts that you could use to troll people.
About
Yeah.
5-6 years ago, I did a video kind of showing all the old AOL progs, as they were called, and yeah, trip down memory lane. The designs of these UIs are just horrendous. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But that's how we learned back then.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like just so you've abandoned baseball, and just gone deep into the underworld of trolling people on AOL, building Doom wads, if I recall correctly.
Wads. Yeah, wad files. That was awesome.
And man, like the degree of artistic expression within that game, it was just incredible. I saw the most incredible mods for Doom.
Yes.
Because I played the heck out of Doom. I remember
yes.
I believe the only time I actually like stayed up like more than one day without sleep was when I first got the Doom shareware. And I just remember walking around and just being like, this is incredible. For like, I don't think I slept for like 2 days.
Yeah, I had a book.
I was having so much fun.
The book was like this thick of like how to make Doom levels. It was amazing. Like it was such a fascinating world, and I was never good, like really good. I was just a young kid doing it. But I knew then, I was like, this is so exciting, just creating stuff on a computer, and that's what got me into it. And like I said, then the web page stuff came along, and we're talking about like front page 97 or front page 98,
Microsoft
which is Microsoft.
Front page. Like you don't need to learn HTML or CSS anymore.
Yeah.
That was
Isn't that funny?
The thinking at the time.
Yeah. And I didn't, I didn't know HTML and CSS. I never typed it in Notepad. My friend locally did. I was like, you're hardcore. I didn't do that stuff. I'm talking about like 98, 99, 2000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used front page 98. And then we switched. I upgraded my workflow to back then it was Macromedia Dreamweaver, I think.
Yes.
And Adobe, of course, bought them a while later. But Macromedia Dreamweaver, my workflow for designing websites used to look like this. I'd use Adobe Photoshop to design it. Think of that like as the old school Figma.
Yeah.
Except it was never meant for designing website interfaces, but that's what people did. That's all we had. So you design your mock-up in that first, your website mock-up. And then you would step into Adobe Fireworks, which may have been a Macromedia product as well. I forget. And Fireworks, you import that, and then you do your slices. So you kind of cut up with this slice tool. Again, there's no programming here, coding at all. And you slice it up, and then you hit export, and it would export your website for you in these sliced frames, and then you take it into something like Dreamweaver, and then you would have to kind of fine-tune it so that it makes sense on a website and not everything is image slices,
right?
If that makes sense. So there was a whole workflow, and I did that for a while as well.
Yeah, I mean, like
that's early 2000s.
If you go back and look at like the early Coca-Cola website or other big brand websites, they had pretty elaborate looking websites even way back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, but they were a lot of images everywhere, right? Like,
yeah.
They have this really cool typography, but it's really just like a little PNG file or something.
And they were all, and when these tools like Fireworks would export your page, it was all structured and scaffolded by tables, HTML table element. So everything was based on tables back then. We didn't have like divs and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. And you had your white space controlled by the tables, by the thickness of the cells and all this. It was interesting. Entirely different way, different times in terms of how we approach design, right now. But even in doing that, I still was developing my sense for UI design because that's timeless. It was all the same concept. You're just designing for one screen size, essentially, like 800 by 600 back then. It was tiny. And so, yeah, even those very early days still probably impact what I do today in some weird way.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear that, like, even though the tools have changed a whole lot, the considerations, using the web is just 100 times better of a user experience in 2024 than it was back then, in the sense that everything is like, you go to a website, you get up, you go pour a cup of coffee or something because it's going to take a while for all the assets to load.
Yeah.
You have to be careful about what you click on because you go to a different web page and you have to wait for things to load, right?
Yeah, and go ahead.
I was just going to say the aesthetic back in like there used to be like these portal websites like Yahoo, which I believe still exists, where it's just a giant list of everything on one page because they know like
Right.
Like page load takes a long time, and like every click is kind of like precious. So like let's put everything right in front of it. And to this day, if you look at like a lot of Chinese websites, a lot of Japanese websites, they are incredibly like content dense compared to like, US websites.
Right. Yeah. And we had some bad practices too early on. Like a lot of us, we were doing splash pages, We just had a splash page for your portfolio, some type of interesting graphic you made in Photoshop. Enter here, and you click enter here. It's like the most unnecessary thing. Now we still have that on some of these, even awards like winning websites. But fortunately, that's not the de facto. And a lot of people did that. A lot of our startup web designers like click here to enter. It's your splash page. You got to have the splash page. It's like no, you don't. But then we also had Flash around the same time. And Flash was real interesting because, like you said, the big companies, they knew what you were just talking about. We need to get people the information fast. But back then, if you were a teenager, you wanted glitzy, crazy graphics. You wanted crazy animations. And that's what we took advantage of with Flash. And Flash, for those of you who aren't watching, maybe you're too young, it was just, it was a really fun way to create animated, interactive websites. And you could do some really cool things with Flash, like special graphics and effects that was just groundbreaking back then. And so in one way, looking back on it, we were approaching it probably the wrong way. A lot of us aspiring designers back then, because we were really just probably utilizing way too much page load time because of the dial-up modems. Like they did not afford you, a lot of room to work with. And so you had to be careful with all those, the audio clicks on the UI, you click a button, you want a sound to occur, it's like all this stuff was just taking way too long to load essentially.
Yeah.
So that's something we had to grow up out of.
Yeah. Well, was there a period, so this is one thing that I'm interested in. We've got so much to talk about, but was there a period where enough people had broadband that you could have like really fancy, splashy websites before the rise of like mobile phones, and then you had to like think about, okay, people are going to be consuming this on a phone too? Was there like some specific period where people could just go hog wild and like build any kind of crazy website? And was there that kind of period?
I don't have that sense of there being a specific time frame like that. I do know I waited for a long time for cable modem, like fast cable-based internet speed to come to my area. And the area that I noticed the biggest factor for that was gaming when I was playing Quake 2. So I played Quake 2 for 10 years, the same game, Quake 2 multiplayer. And when I would shoot the rocket launcher on dial-up, I had to aim in the virtual world 10 feet ahead of the person.
Yeah.
And because it would just take time. It was a big lag. But then when you got the cable modem, and my ping was 215 back then. That would be a great ping. And then we got the cable modem, and it was 32 sometimes. It was the biggest difference. Now, of course, that was a huge difference with the web as well. But for me, I kind of don't really recall that time. I was slower on the uptake with mobile development. When the iPhone came out, I kind of just waited it not intentionally. I just kind of never got involved with the early adopters of mobile design because it was just so new, and I didn't really consider that very much.
Yeah. Well, in terms of what you did with those skills as you're a teenager, you're into building Doom maps, you're into building designs with some of these primordial tools, Photoshop, Fireworks, Dreamweaver, getting things live on the internet without even necessarily needing to know the HTML and CSS that, of course, ultimately everybody has to learn.
Right.
In performance, accessibility, all these other things, you don't necessarily want to hand that over to a tool, right? So maybe you can talk about where you went from there in terms of what the next few years of your life were like. You went to did you finish high school, and where you went from there?
Right. So once I hit high school, that's when I forget, it was the counselor in the high school. They talked to every kid, and they're like, okay, what are your plans? Do you want to go to college? And my parents were old school, and they just they didn't grow up with a rich family, so they were old. They didn't realize loans existed. So they always told me and my siblings, I have a brother and sister who are older, you're not going to college, that you're not going to be able to afford that. We can't afford that, so you're on your own, go to like a technical school or something like that. And I was like, well, you know what? I really like computers and I know I can make a living from this. And back then, like in high school, early high school, the way I made money is I would do these design contests that these webmaster forums would put on. So design contests are a thing that actually still exist to this day. And they were, I think, probably more popular back in the day, but like 99designs.com is one of them. That's a modern example. But yeah, I would do design contests that people would have on forums. Like design this logo, winner gets $300. And, so I would get $300 here and maybe design a landing page or something like that and get $800 here. It's very sparse, being in high school. And actually one time, to back up a little bit, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade and I got a job offer from a software company in Fort Knox, because I was helping this guy with AOL API Visual Basic programming. It never worked out because they were going to pay me $30 an hour, but their human resources wouldn't allow it because I was just too young. And so that, that experience and then making a little bit of money online, that's why I was like, I'm going to finish high school, but I'm not going to college because it's just, I didn't know otherwise. And I'm glad that actually happened in the long run. Because I didn't have all those bills, and it did work out in the end.
Yeah, and that's 4 years you got to spend in industry that you would have spent,
right. And so
frat parties or something. I don't know what people do in college.
And so then I graduated, and at that point, I'm not making any type of consistent, normal amount of money. Unfortunately, my parents weren't the type like, you're 18, you have to get out. So I lived with them until I was 23. And that whole time I had this girlfriend, and we got engaged, and so when we got married, I moved out like that same day. It's like a very traditional thing. It just worked out that way. But all the way up until that point, like I was about 23, I wasn't making any consistent money. I was very worried. I was like, I have to leave soon. I'm not making good money. I don't want to work for somebody else because my father, he had always been self-employed. And
what did he do?
So he all he did, and he actually still just did it here recently after 3 strokes, by the way. He serviced washers and dryers, and also he sold used washers and dryers. And so it doesn't sound glamorous at all, but he was making, like, for a while when he was really established, like, $10,000 months, which is a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
And
this
so
is before all the greedflation of 2022. In the 80s, $10,000 a month is like the equivalent of like $30,000 a month today.
Oh yeah,
so,
it's crazy.
Yeah, very solid income.
So he didn't. It was rare that he hit that number. I mean, usually I think it was like $6,000 or $7,000 a month. But having seen that, and also having this idea, even if it was false, that I can't go to college, that it lit a fire under my butt. But I realized it was hard to figure out how am I going to make it in a freelance context,
Mm-hmm.
And how I ended up actually making my first, establishing a real career out of this was purely by accident. I was dig.com. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what
dig.com.
D-I-double-G. Yep.
Reddit precursor.
Yes. And it's basically a one of the first, if not the first, social bookmarking type site. I'm not sure if it was, but it was real popular back then. And if you made it if your article or your content made it to the front page of dig.com, you were getting thousands of visitors to your website. And so I remember thinking, my wedding is 6 months away, and I'm not making consistent money yet at all. And I wouldn't be able to afford our rent for our apartment or whatever. Well, I decided, I'm going to write a tutorial just to see if I can hit front page dig.com. And it was one of the worst tutorials ever, how to design an awesome logo. And it hit front page dig.com. And I got all these thousands, like 13,000 visitors or something. And I wasn't selling anything. There was no monetization. And, I was like, okay, that's cool. And then 5 months later, I just randomly checked my website stats, and I'm getting 1,000 visitors per day. I'm like, where is this coming from? And it was Google. And so back then, if you ranked very well on dig.com, other websites would link to you. And so it had a natural SEO effect where I'm ranking literally number 1, number 2, number 3 for how to design a logo, how to create a logo, how to make a logo. And so I thought to myself, wait, okay, so I'm showing in this one really long, like, written tutorial how to make a logo. Most people realize they're not going to be able to. So I made my own backend because I understood PHP and MySQL and stuff. I made my own backend, and people could just click this banner like, hey, I'll design your logo for you if you're not competent or something like that. And the way I did it is I didn't want to talk to clients. So I built a whole entire order system, and there was an intake form for the project. And I charged $75 for one logo design concept, and that was it. And once I put that banner on that page, I got basically one order per day I average. So there I go, and I just started a career by accident. And of course, over the next 5 to 7 years, I was doing primarily logo and identity designs, essentially. And I had amassed about 2,000 clients, and I increased the price up to like 300, which, you know, I would have done things differently if I had the information I know now. And then of course those people needed websites as well, some of them. And so I would offer a service where they could have a website designed for them, like a Photoshop, like a mock-up for like $600. And so that's how I started making money. And fortunately, right when I moved out, I was making enough money, and then I started making more, and we could talk about, you know, what I did thereafter.
Yeah.
But that's how I kind of got started from, okay, being a teenager has some skills but not sure how to make money, into what was essentially an accident. And that lasted for 5 to 7 years before the algorithm and that page eventually stopped, you know, receiving as much traffic.
Yeah. So, I mean, $300 a design. You said you're getting like around one client per day, 2,000 clients. Like, that's a lot of work.
It is insane. And, you know, what's interesting is traditionally people think, you know, if you're a freelancer, you have to talk with the client, you have to have meetings with the clients and stuff. And if you're at a certain price point, and I know, I think his name's Brett from Design Joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has this similar approach, and I know there's a lot of controversy around, you know, him and his business or whatever, but that certainly can work where you don't have to necessarily talk to the clients before they actually pay you. So it really comes down to having a really good landing page that's effective on all fronts. And you can actually, you know, make a living by not having to deal with the client aspect, as long as you have a really good intake form. And I was able to fine tune mine to get the information that I needed out of the client, essentially. So they would order, fill out the form. It would tell them there's a wait period, and I would design it, and they would see it, and then offer feedback. Like if they're happy, like they could request a revision if they want for X amount, and if we would have a back and forth with like a little comment system. And most clients were really cool. Most clients I was able to satisfy within 1 to 2 revisions. And then, of course, you have your outliers that were nightmares to deal with after, you know, and of course, if you're dealing with that bulk of clients, you're going to have terrible clients that you deal with. And at that point, you just kind of refund them and just, you know, I'm sorry, I can't. But that was very few and far between. So it worked very well.
Yeah. Wow. So that's really good insight, like in terms of kind of productizing your services.
Right.
Essentially getting it to where you've got a system in place that is not necessarily one size fit all, but one size fits most. So that, yes, there are people who are just incompatible with the way you want to get things done.
Right.
And your time's too valuable to, you know, try to work with every client and make everything a success. So you just give them the money back and part ways and focus on the people that you can help. And it doesn't sound like you had any shortage of people that wanted your help.
No. I mean, that website, you know, I replicated that success with that article with one called "How to Design a Website," and so I actually ended up ranking for like number 1, number 2, number 3 for those type of keywords as well. And so, yeah, I was making over 100,000 a year for, you know, a good couple 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And that was basically from 2006 to like 2012, 2013 or so. And so I was doing web design for clients, all exclusive work. My only tutorial was that tutorial that I wrote, you know, and then my very first YouTube video was on 2010, and that was just for the fun of it. I didn't take YouTube seriously until about 2014, but we might be skipping ahead a little bit too much. But
yeah, Well, let's step back and kind of like unpack some of the things that you just said. So you didn't go to college.
No.
You don't have to worry about paying back student debt. You've lived very economically, it sounds like, staying with your parents until you got married. You got married
Yep.
pretty young, like I did. I think I was like 25 maybe when I got married.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
and so you've just got this kind of like, and also you didn't move to like a big expensive city like a lot of
Right.
people do when they're young. You just kind of stayed around.
Well,
Ohio.
I'll tell you why. And basically, I think it was a year after we got married, my wife got pregnant, and we realized, we can't move from our family. They're too much help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like they were so much help. And our firstborn was, is still, our trying child. It requires all of our energy. So we had tremendous help here locally, and like just, better weather it did not supersede having help from family.
Yeah.
And now we're just here, and we really love our property, so we don't feel like moving. So
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you're one of the first people I've interviewed on the show who like lives out in the open. I think you said you have like 7 acres, which is for anyone outside of the U.S. I'm not going to attempt to convert that into hectares, but it's a lot. It's a lot of space. Like, I think this is a very standard, Texas, house.
Mm-hmm.
I think it occupies maybe like a quarter of an acre.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
the property
that was our house before this
Yeah.
in the city. Yeah. It was real small, and but I started to become more successful, and like we just had to get a bigger place because we were like I think it was like a 1,200 square foot house at that time, and then we moved here about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, this might be like an eighth of an acre. It's pretty small. We do have a backyard, and one of the things I want to talk about real quick while we're talking about houses and backyards, you were on the path of the eclipse that happened here in the United States this week.
Yes.
As of recording, today is April 10th when we're recording this.
Yeah.
Just 2 days ago, there was a cosmic event that only happens, at least in Dallas, once every 300 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was cool. Yeah, we rented a cabin. It's about 25 minutes away from here and my wife and my mom, like they've been planning this for like 5 years, since like we had a partial one in 2017. So they've been gung ho over it, and I saw it, and it was really cool. It was cooler than I thought it would be. Just to look up and like you see that perfect little ring there. It was very cool.
Yeah.
The crickets started chirping in the middle of the day because it got dark. It was really cool because we were up next to a lake. It was so cool.
Yeah. We just watched it from our backyard, and like all our LED yard lights came on.
Yeah.
Which was really funny because they're all like,
Right. So now
solar
we're planning on going in 2044 to North or South Dakota, because that's the next total eclipse, I guess.
2044?
So 20 years away.
Yeah.
If you go to South Dakota or North Dakota. That's what my wife said. Is that otherwise here, 2099.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to live that long. I'd be 116.
Yeah, that'd be, I mean, you can hold out. I was like, man, I like the eclipse so much. I think I'm just going to chill in my backyard for the next 300 years and catch the next one.
Right.
But yeah, like it was, how did it make you feel?
No, it was cool. I had my family around me. And it was really cool. We had our glasses, our little glasses, and it was awesome. I didn't make a huge big deal about it as much as I think it really inspired my wife and my family a little bit more than me, and I knew it's just the moon going in front of the sun. It is cool though.
Yeah.
And the fact that they can pinpoint the precision, accuracy, and know exactly where it's at, as people at NASA.
Yeah, it's really impressive. Technical feat, being able to predict these things,
Right.
Given how complex, orbits are and everything.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, well, so you've got this, I mean, you're in a very, enviable position, having all this freelance business coming in. You're not necessarily, you do marketing in the form of publishing these tutorials that generate SEO,
Right.
essentially that generate inbound leads. But
Yes.
you're not out there having to like pound the pavement and sell yourself, sell
Right.
clients on like, hey,
Right.
I'm Gary Simon and I can do web design for you. I can do what
Right.
you need me to do. People
Right.
are coming to you. That's amazing.
Right. And so, and I really, that was great that I had that win. But I knew just in the back of my mind, but I didn't act on it. And this is just being young. And it was a very difficult lesson to learn, is that you can't get complacent, especially with anything dealing with internet and technology, because it moves fast. And so I remember I was out there playing tennis, and this one day I was thinking to myself, if I stop getting orders and Google stops sending me traffic, I'm going to be in a bad place, because I have this $1,400 mortgage. We just moved into this nice place. My second daughter was just born, and sure enough, Google made some changes to their algorithm, and I only had those 2 pages. Like, I didn't keep making content. That was such a stupid idea, and I just took it for granted that I would just rank forever. And slow enough, over about a 6-month period, my income went from like making, like $10,000 a month down to like, $4,000, $3,000. And it was such a bad time. And that was, what was that? That was about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I took up, I started drinking a lot. And like we had to move out of our house because we couldn't afford it.
Damn! You had to give up your house.
Yes, and so we moved to the city, into a much smaller place, more manageable house payment. My wife went back to work as a registered nurse part-time. So that was a real big wake-up call for me. That was like, okay, you knew this was going to happen. Like, nothing lasts forever. Why were you just being complacent? And that's the biggest. That's a big takeaway that still applies today, probably in any aspect of a business, any type of business. But especially if you're a freelancer, if you're not doing enough to push yourself out there continually and promote yourself and try to diversify the ways in which you're able to make money, after a while, you might have like a run for 5 years. You consider yourself lucky if you're able to just kind of like maintain the status quo for 5 years, doing nothing essentially.
Yeah.
Because that was me. I was doing something by working with my clients, but the new leads weren't coming in because the traffic was dropping. And so I had to make some decisions at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's like a nice parable. As I like to always tell my friends who are in SEO, we always say, live by the Google, die by the Google.
Right.
And
it's amazing when it's working, but when it's not, it's like, oh my.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And certainly, I think you've learned a lot from that, and you now
Right.
have this very distributed, kind of like multifaceted approach toward business.
Right.
And I'd like to talk more autobiographically, but maybe you could talk about what your setup looks like today, how you're bringing in clients.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into the nitty gritty of working with clients, because there are going to be a lot of practical takeaways. I just want to understand what you learned, how you applied those learnings, and what, design course, what Gary Simon Incorporated looks like today. Right.
So today I don't deal with clients. I guess you could call my coaching clients, but that's entirely different. So, after, just to back up, I won't spend much time on this yet, but to back up, after right when my business was failing, another opportunity presented itself, and somebody emailed me asking if I would create a course for them, because they saw a couple of the YouTube videos I did, and I was just doing Photoshop tutorials, and I had only uploaded like a couple of them, and so I took that offer up, and they paid me like $2,500 to make a course on like Photoshop or something. And so I started making my money that way. And so I pivoted from client work to teaching now. And that happened very quick, fortunately, and I'm glad it did, because I was able to not have to get a regular job, so to speak. And I was just basically contracted on a per month basis to create a course. So I was making one course every month, typically about 120, 90 to, it was typically about 90 minutes long that they wanted. And this was Envato Network, which are the people behind Theme Forest, which is, I think, still popular, but it used to be really popular.
Yeah, familiar with their work.
Right.
I get their emails occasionally because I think I bought something on one of their websites a long time ago.
And so they own tutsplus.com.
Yeah.
And that's what I was teaching on. And so I did about 2 years worth of work with that. So anyhow, not to we can go back to that.
Yeah.
But just to answer your question, so I haven't really, of course, sparingly, maybe one time a year, I'll have a client that I do actual work with. But sometimes that client could be me. It could be a personal project. But that's one of those things, being a creator for so long now. I've been being a creator for about 10 years. And being on the teaching side of things is, yes, you have to continually learn a lot of new things to be able to create new content. But I'm at a point now, it's like I want to start getting back into client work so that I can start changing. For one, I could start getting real world experience again back with working with clients, which I'm not afraid of because I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I know the current skills. Obviously my skills 10 years ago wouldn't translate today. But so I'm always very current because I have to be with my YouTube channel. But I do want to get back into creating, some type of a hybrid of a design subscription agency, maybe where I only take on one client a month or so until I'm done with them. And then as a part of their package, they'll get featured. If they want it to be, their project will get featured on my YouTube channel. So it's kind of like a win-win if they want that marketing and publicity along with having me design their site. And so I'm going to that's my plan, is to get back into that sort of thing as a way to get into client work, but also have new content and interesting content on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. So let's say I have like a barbecue sauce company and I'm like, oh, I can not only get my barbecue sauce website designed, implemented, potentially set up to be relatively maintainable, but also I'm going to get not free publicity, but based in, like, people are going to be looking at my barbecue website as Gary explains how he built it. Right. So it's just like additional incidental publicity. Right.
Yeah. And I would think, maybe it wouldn't be a barbecue sauce company. Maybe it would be, somebody who has a business that could benefit from that type of audience that I have. So something like design or development related, perhaps, because they would get their biggest bang for the buck in that context.
So like, let's say some low code tool, for example, or
that would be
potentially like, an AI API or something like that. Right.
Right. Yeah. So I'm excited to start working on that sometime this year. So.
Very cool. Well, anybody who wants to potentially get a client of Gary's, shoot him a message. I'll put his contact below. But I want to talk about freelance, because freelance is how most people start their developer careers, unless they just happen to go to a career fair after graduating from Stanford computer science degree and have this like nice carpet rolled out for them by like a FANG company or something like that. Yeah. Most people that are learning to code are going to get a friend or a family member or a local business, somebody to give them money to develop something for them. Develop like some internal tool, develop some sort of website, maybe even just build like a custom Shopify page or something like that, right? Like, so maybe you can talk a little bit about the skills that are important to a freelancer. And I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to fire off at you. First, maybe you could talk about the importance of like sales and marketing skills as a freelancer.
Yeah. I'm going to say not a lot of people want to hear this probably, but in my opinion, at the very least, understanding marketing is just as important, if not more important, than understanding, the actual skills that you need to deliver the product or the service. In this case, it could be UI, UX design skills, or front-end development, or back-end, or even internet marketing if you're doing that route. Yeah. But knowing how to do internet marketing itself is just as important than those things as well, in my opinion, because even though I satisfied like 98% of my clients with the logo design business and stuff, once Google stopped sending me all those, all that traffic, I didn't know what to do really from there. And so I didn't really have good marketing skills, even though that's because I got lucky, that web page ranked very well and I got lucky with it. So when that happened, I was like, oh my, how do I get traffic, and like I could design really well and, I could do all these things, but they're worth nothing if you don't have the traffic and you don't have, the ability to sell your services. And so my practical advice in today's, current environment is there's many different ways to get clients. There's There's search engine optimization, which is still around. I don't think that's going anywhere. Of course, the AI stuff has kind of thrown a wrench into that a little bit, but search engine optimization, if you want to choose that and you want to stick with that as being your go-to source of like how I'm going to get clients, you can completely do that and go down that rabbit hole and start learning SEO. Or you can go the social media route, and that's a route that I took for my business, my education business. Of course, I focused hardcore on YouTube. And so you have to pick an avenue and you have to stick with it. If you try to spread yourself too thin by trying to do SEO on top of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and X and all that stuff, it's going to be probably a little bit more difficult. At the same time, there's a middle ground because you don't want to just choose one like I did with Google. But the good part of the story is that it's just a matter of, okay, you took the time to start learning your craft and your skills. Like if you're a UI designer, that might be being really good at UI design and you have a great eye for UI design aesthetics. Well, you need to take that same type of motivation, apply it equally to, okay, I have to get clients now. And how am I going to do that? That's through internet marketing, through one of those channels.
Yeah, interesting. So just to recap what you're saying, take that same passion that you feel for the technology that you're using and channel it into getting clients and learning how to use marketing channels to your advantage.
Right. Right.
Because a lot of people,
I can talk a little bit more specifically about how one can do that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people out there consider themselves like introverts, and as a result, they may feel very out of place going into like a Toastmasters or like a Rotary Club or going to like a local American Chamber of Commerce type event or something like that, and trying to make friends and potentially get clients. What would your advice be to those people?
You have to, and so that's like the same thing with my wife. She's a huge introvert, and I want her to start creating an internet presence for her. She's a lactation consultant now, so she helps moms breastfeed basically. And she's the only one in the Tri-County area. And I told her, I was like, you can make a lot of money, like if you were to sell like a book or something and become the influencer route. But she's like, I hate being in front of the camera. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't like the idea either. If you go back on my channel and you click on the videos tab and you sort it by the oldest first, you'll see one of my first videos where I actually presented myself on screen. That was in 2014. And it's terrible, you don't feel right about it. You feel out of place, but that's an expected part of the process because it's something new that you've never done before. So you look at yourself, you might look at yourself and say, this is so cringy, but as long as you're delivering the content, and people will like it. And you'll see that based on how the content's, how it's performing in terms of views, likes, comments, dislikes, and whatever platform has for engagement factors. But the idea here is that you have to do it if you want to be successful. Now, I'm not saying you have to get behind video camera, but I'm saying whatever it is that you want to do, if it requires you to do something that's out of your comfort zone, you have to just ignore that. You have to ignore it, because otherwise, what's the alternative? The alternative is not doing it, and you're going to fail no matter what. So you don't have to have the best equipment. I certainly didn't. You slowly start to amass and increase your production value and all that stuff if we're talking about video and content and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So just to, again, recap what you're saying, like at the end of the day, you could be an amazing developer. You could be amazing at understanding client requirements and everything. But if any one of those different like legs of your stool is weak, the stool is going to fall over, right? It's going to collapse under you. And it sounds like being extroverted or putting yourself out there, doing the uncomfortable thing is one of those things that you just have to,
Right. And some people will find that more natural than others because we're all different and we're all, you could be a type A personality versus, somebody who's just a complete introvert, and those people will have an easier time, but you can still do it. You can still get behind that camera and click record and start recording yourself. There's nothing stopping you unless you don't have a camera, of course. So, and even if it's not even video related content, it could be, for instance, if you're going to take the social media route, well, I say, you need to amass a following essentially. And how do you do that? Just by typing out good content, or if it's going to be, it could be written content, it could be just pictures or infographics that are interesting, maybe based on what you're learning as a UI UX designer, you're sharing your work. Grow your audience as much as possible, and you do that by producing content. If you want to take that route, there's a lot of routes to getting clients, and we can delve into that a little bit more. But
well, let's talk about the clients themselves that you typically work with, or that you worked with when you're doing a lot more freelance work. What kind of institutions are your main clients? Are they like small businesses generally, or sole?
Yeah. So back then, when I was dealing with those type of clients, they were typically, somebody's just going to Google literally and typing how to design a logo or website. And a lot of these are small business owners or people who are just launching a business. I never got to the point where I was working with like really large businesses or institutions, because I was content with, the amount of money I was making, back in like 2010, $10,000 a month is still a lot of money. Not so much now, but I was just content with it, and I did work a lot of my own like side projects. I had several different ventures, and I applied my my learnings that way. But in terms of the clients themselves, minimal communication. Mainly, there's probably a good mix of like local brick and mortar businesses, but also internet businesses as well, because I was known pretty well in forums and stuff, and that was my clientele. And when you're charging less, such a cheap amount, I wasn't really on the radar of like really large businesses. And that's one of the reasons I want to kind of get back into it as well. I know that having the information that I know now, and also my network and my audience, that I could definitely, charge a lot more, and work on a little bit like a longer time frame per client. Compared to what I was doing before.
So one thing that jumped out at me that you've said in the past is that you don't like to charge an hourly rate, but instead charge by the deliverable itself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How did you come on how did you come to this conclusion? And has there ever been any pushback from clients that are thinking in terms of like, oh, I just want you to work for N hours or something like that?
Right. And I've always told them, I was like, it really depends. And I always felt not comfortable with taking on a project. They gave me all the information that I want, and because if you're going to charge like a per project base and not hourly, then your intake form has to be very comprehensive. It has to cover all the bases, because you don't want it to be a situation where they're like, oh, okay, you told me it would be $2,000 to make this site, and then they're like, but I want this now. And I'm like, well, you didn't include that. So like if it's a very open, like whimsical thing where the client may not know what needs to be done or whatever, hourly would make sense. But most of the time, when I dealt with clients, they were able to provide me with all the information I need so that I would be comfortable enough with giving them a solid, concrete price.
Yeah. And are there any red flags that you see when you're looking for a freelance client? Like, is there like some pattern or some persona that you're like, oh no, it's one of these kinds of potential clients?
Yeah. So like, don't undervalue your services. Don't sell yourself for too cheap, because those type of clients typically end up being the most picky. So red flags in that context. So for me, with being that most of my clients, I never talked to them before they became my client, I could see red flags in their intake form in that they hardly fill anything out. And so I would sometimes respond to them, like, listen, I need more information if I'm going to be able to accurately design an identity for you. So for everybody else, though, who might not take that route and they have the traditional approach where clients will first contact them, well, it's very important to be able to read into what they're saying and how they're saying things, because you would see red flags potentially based on just the words they choose to use and the ideas that they're trying to get across. There's red flags that would say, I'm not going to take on this project. There's definitely those scenarios. And it might be a situation where they seem too iffy and not certain on project requirements. As long as they're certain and they answer everything that you need, then I think the red flags could be avoided But if they're not able to provide you with all the necessary information you need and they seem wishy-washy, those might be the ones that you might want to avoid.
Yeah, and that's just because they may not know what they want, and if they don't know what they want, you're not going to know what they want.
Yeah, it could be a situation like that as well. And it's really hard. Like sometimes, like my mom, like if she sends texts and we text each other back and forth, like she's just not familiar with internet vernacular and how you say things or whatever. And like for me, I feel like I can read anything anybody types and get a really good sense of what they're thinking, and what they're inferring. So having that skill is important, I would say, to be able to determine like if they're going to be a good client. It's the same thing with relationships. Some people are just terrible at picking a partner. they just lack this innate sense to really read a person well, which is unfortunate. But I've always thought that I could read people well. And so I was always able to avoid the bad, horrible client situation for the most part. They existed, and you're never going to be able to avoid them 100%. Because people will charge back on you, if they pay you through, and like that happens. I mean, especially after 2,000 clients, people will charge back when you're dealing with a service-based industry where it's a very aesthetic and a subjective idea, like what constitutes a good logo. They might think it's one with like a lens flare, and I'm saying that's a terrible idea. So you're going to have that. But as long as your skills are good and your communication skills are good and you can read people, you shouldn't have much of a problem with that sort of thing. And it's certainly not a reason not to get into service-based industry.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about pricing, because I imagine you have like a la carte services. Like if you want this, then it's this much.
Right.
But sometimes when you work with a client, maybe you're doing something more bespoke. And how do you know how much to ask for a given project? What's your thought process?
Yeah, for me, it's like it's a difficult question because there's not an objectively correct answer for every business. I suppose through testing, you could find what that might be. And when I say testing, we're talking like A/B split testing with pricing and stuff like that to find like, okay, if I raise the price, am I going to lose clients? Is my conversion ratio going to drop? And that makes sense, of course, if you're doing the type of pricing that I was doing, where it's upfront. Like when somebody visited that page, they didn't have to contact me first to realize what the price is. And that's because I was doing kind of like real quick work. In a way, I was kind of like a McDonald's of logo design because it was cheap. It was really cheap. And so I could get away with just, But then again, Bread of Design Joy, I mean, if he's charging $5,000 per client, it's not necessarily that clients won't do it because it's more expensive, but you have to have a really good onboarding process to get people to want to hand you the money first without talking to you first.
Yeah.
So for me, like if I'm talking to your average, like your list, anybody watching this right now, you may not approach it that way because that's not your typical way to take on design clients. Usually there'll be a contact form on your site, and you'll get a little bit of details about the project, but then it'll send you that email or a notification of some sort. And then you're going to contact them, get more information, and then you come to a price. That's the typical way, which I rarely ever did myself because I just didn't want to deal with clients and client communication. I wanted to minimize that as much as possible. And not to say that that's what you should do. That's just how I personally wanted to handle things, hands off as much as possible. And so, but if I were to take that route, the price that I chose is going to be based on my research of what other freelancers, in my specific niche are charging, and you can really niche down as a designer or developer. Like if you're a UI UX designer, maybe you don't even have clients. Maybe you'll sell Framer templates or Webflow templates, or you use that to, as a side hustle or something. But in terms of knowing what to charge, I would get out there personally. I would see, okay, anybody with a design subscription agency, if I'm going to do something like that, I'm going to take notes of what they're charging based on the quality of the work, based on what they're delivering. You might even sign up, or you might hit up another designer asking them you could pretend just to be a client. I've never done this, but I think it's a good idea because you could then you'd be able to see, not to intentionally mislead somebody, but what's their first response look like after you contact them, for maybe they'll give you pricing ideas. But for me, I would see what the market is dictating.
Yeah.
And I would, instead of selling myself short, which is what I did initially with the logo design, I would start higher than what I think I'm worth. And more oftentimes than not, you are worth what you think you're not worth,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Are you ever afraid to like throw out a price that people are going to balk at it and it's going to end the conversation?
Oh, yeah.
Or?
Well, in a context that fits my business currently, when I used to take on sponsorships on my YouTube channel, that was one of those things where you have to throw out a price to these companies, like Indeed.com. Like, they were one of my biggest clients, and I worked with so many others,
Yeah.
like Skillshare and all them, and they hit you up in sort of the same way. Like, it's all economics, supply and demand. Their demand was they wanted traffic, targeted traffic to their business or product, and in that case, I was just looking what other creators were doing. We have a Discord server. All of us YouTube programmers and stuff, we have a Discord server, and it's private, and we talk about what we charge, and that's based on your views and all that stuff. So the same thing can be said about your web design business as well. You have to be honest with your skills. Because obviously not all UI UX designers and front-end developers are of the same caliber. So you have to be honest with yourself, and take into consideration what others are charging, and then also implement that and experiment with split testing. If you're getting traffic to your website, you're trying to generate leads, split test everything as much as possible, to find out what it is you need to do to get more leads, get more conversions, and then experiment with pricing that you tell people as well.
Yeah. So the website, the actual stuff you can control, by the time people go to, GarySimon.com or some comparable like portfolio site, or
Right.
some sort of, I guess squeeze page is what we used to call them back in the day,
Right.
where
Yeah.
your goal is to get people like down the funnel
Yes.
and clicking through to contacting or entering their credit card or something like that.
Correct.
Before you can even get people there, of course, you need to get out there. And the way that most people get out there these days is through like SEO or through Google
Social
Ads, which
media.
is pretty
Yep,
expensive.
or that.
Facebook ads. I mean,
Oh,
that is
yeah.
the way you can do that if you have enough money.
Right.
They used to say it takes money to make money, but to some extent, if you create content or if you're on social media or if you're good with SEO, you can kind of like get free traffic.
Yes.
But if you were starting over, or maybe how would you advise somebody who's starting today and they've already got great skills? Let's
Okay.
take for granted that these people already have
Yep.
great skills. We'll talk a little bit about how to get great skills later, but
Right.
let's assume that people do have great skills and it's just a question of getting clients. What kind of projects or what kind of things do you think would attract clients to actually come to your website?
Right. So, like I said earlier, there's a lot of different ways to find clients, and I think it's important for that individual to understand first all their options. Like, what are the ways that you can get a client as a UI UX designer, and what are the ways that you can get a client as a front-end developer? Because those are slightly different things. There's a lot of overlap, of course. And once you understand the various methods of which you could potentially gain clients, and maybe even not even gain clients, like if you're not even going to work with a client, like I said, you could sell templates, framework templates, and Webflow templates, and make really good money doing that if you focused on it. So once you understand what the options are, then you can pair that with what you're comfortable with focusing on in terms of like how I'm going to choose to build clients. So when I have my coaching calls with people that are in this exact scenario, I've had several of them. I have this little document and I tell them, okay, well, the modern way, I would say for most like UI UX designers and front-end developers, I would focus on social media personally, and building an audience that way. I would share my work as much as possible. I would follow a lot of the people who are already established and in the position that I want to be in. And one little hack I have for that, if you go to awards.com, awwwards.com, there's a jury section. And they have jurors there that kind of rate the best websites, and it lists their X profile and their LinkedIn profile if they have one, and there are like hundreds of these people. And I tell them, just follow them, develop a network, see how these people carry themselves on social media, see what it is that they're doing, because these people, they're working either with large companies or design agencies, or they're solo, and they're charging like $20,000-$30,000 for projects or more. And so they're at the pinnacle. A lot of these people are, and so you want to follow them and see how they carry themselves, and then you can interact with them. You can that's networking. That's part of what it is. Another thing you can do, like I said, sharing your work is the obvious thing, but also sharing, if you're a beginner, sharing tips that you learned as you go, because suddenly you become the best person to teach that thing, because being that the newbie problem, was fresh in your mind. And you'll find that people will start to follow you naturally. And having a following is a beneficial factor if you're trying to either get employed, like in a traditional employer-employee relationship, but also freelance as well. I'm not saying you just want to have a ton of other designers following you, but you'll find that if you start putting out your work consistently and you're engaged and I am a UI UX designer, this is what I put out today, and mention your portfolio and stuff. By nature of having followers of perhaps other people who are in your shoes, it starts to, it becomes a really good factor in, other designers reaching out and collabing with you, and perhaps they have another, maybe they have a client that's not a good fit for them, or there's just so many different ways if you're able to build up a following on social media. So I think social media is, like, in my opinion, one of the best ways to get started, because it's something that you can do while learning, and so I think that's a great aspect, or a great method for trying to just establish a presence online, and from that, you can definitely get to a point where you're getting a lot of client requests.
Yeah. I mean, social media, you hit it kind of on the head, in my humble opinion. Social media is something you can do along the way. It's almost kind of free. It doesn't take that much time to tweet about this project you just spent like 10 hours building. It takes like 2 seconds to tweet about that. Right. Yep. And you just kind of do it along the way. And it's like, it's almost like a limb is kind of how I think of social media. It's like a way of me expressing myself and sharing information. It's like, you know, an organ.
Yeah, and then if you want to take it a step further, and this is something I did for a while as well, is, I would, every time I learned something, you could write an article about it. So I had another site called quirks.com, and I got that up to 10,000 visitors a day. And I was teaching Angular back then. And so I ranked very high for Angular. And all I did was, I kind of followed the Gary Vaynerchuk route. And that's what got me started on YouTube, actually. He's like, make a piece of content every day. It doesn't matter what it is. And so he did that with his wine library TV. He did like 3 years of every day doing a wine review, and just went nuts on it. And it was very successful because no matter what, he made a video. So I did that as well. My first 100 videos were 100 videos in 100 days, and I got burned out. But that was huge. So if somebody wanted to take that mentality, you need to apply that mentality. Like, if you're serious, you need to apply that. If it's going to be social media you're focusing on, you need to do something. It doesn't have to be every day, but if you're going to determine it's 2 to 3 times a week I'm putting out content, then you have to stick with that no matter what. You have to be like Forrest Gump, and that's the mindset that you have to get into, whether you're trying to learn a new skill, and that means learning something every day, or promoting something every day. That's where the consistency will pay off, regardless of what avenue you're choosing. So for me, I would write an article every time I uploaded a video for a while, and so therefore that took care of the SEO. I started getting like long tail traffic keywords and all that stuff. And you don't have to be an SEO god to understand how to rank. You just have to be absolute consistent and pumping out content a lot. And that's what you can do if you don't have like a big marketing budget, like through paid ads. The paid ads can be very profitable, but you typically have to lose a lot of money because it requires optimization. If we're talking about paid ads, like through like Facebook or Google,
there's like a discovery process. Like, you have to iterate on your ads and use Facebook's tools.
That's why I
don't,
and
you're paying money the whole way.
Yeah, and that's why I personally don't advocate for it. I've done paid ads for a while, like a long time ago. So I don't know what the current. I'm sure it's more competitive. So it's going to be more difficult, and it requires money up front, and you may lose it's common for marketers to lose thousands of dollars early on in a campaign, because you have to really make sure your ad copy is very good, the initial banner that they click on, like whether that's on Google or Facebook, and then you have to make sure your landing page is like on point, and so for me, if you're starting out, you don't have much money, SEO, organic SEO is a really great way, along with social media.
Awesome. And I just want to echo some of the sentiments. FreeCodeCamp as a charity, we've never had the budget for like advertising, and because FreeCodeCamp's free, there's not any ROI on advertising. So we've always kind of been, limited to social media, limited to Google SEO, which for every podcast, I write like a short article summarizing that podcast, publish that on our own website. Having your own website, having that be optimized, having that be accessible, having that be fast, but basically what you just said, you already spent the time to create the video tutorial, or why not also share it on social media? Why not also have an article that kind of serves as a vehicle, an SEO vehicle for that piece of content? So I just
and that can come down to delegating too. I mean, it takes time to write stuff, and I've always been bad at delegating. It's the one thing like I have to improve, is being willing to allow other people to take over parts that are kind of mundane, and so I've been a bad business person in that regard, because you can only grow so much, until you hit a ceiling, which I have hit a couple years ago. So I'm making changes, in that regard, but being willing to have other people do it. But I mean, if you're willing to hustle, I mean, and you have to sometimes, you have to hustle at different times in your life. You're never going to be a hustler 24/7. I don't care what anybody says.
It's not sustainable.
For me, I go through periods, where I'm a little bit more relaxed. I spent 6 months building this studio, and then my business, like, I wouldn't say I neglected it, but I wasn't on top, and so those are things that you have to look out for.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I genuinely believe that just doing fewer things but doing them well is totally fine. And there's this old saying I always heard as a kid: if you want something done right, do it yourself. And like to some extent, like I don't have any assistants or anybody that helps me with, like Bo will help upload the podcast to YouTube, and he'll help add my bass intro to it, and make sure, like, do some very basic video production. But Bo runs the entire FreeCodeCamp YouTube channel. But like that is kind of delegated to him, like some of that. But in terms of things that I do every week, my job is pretty simple in that, like, I've chosen to prioritize a few key things that I can do sustainably, indefinitely.
Okay, right.
So I think where a lot of people will have problems and they burn out is they try to do too many things as opposed to doing a few things well.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems. Like, people might see me and like, oh, this guy's really good at UI, UX design. He can do front-end development. He can do identity design and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, well, I've been doing this for like 25 years or like more, and so of course I can have these skills and be pretty good at all of them, but if you're trying to start off being like a full stack developer, you're going to have a very hard time. Like, you have to pick one thing and really focus on that. I have no problem if somebody wants to learn Figma as a UI, UX designer, and then on the side, they're trying to learn HTML and like a little bit of CSS so they can understand. Like, that's okay, in my opinion. That's, it's always, it can be really boring the opposite if you're only, if you're requiring yourself only to work within like one tiny thing. So there's other skills that you can work in, but I wouldn't start trying to learn like Laravel PHP along with Figma and like try to do both at the same time and try to get both of those type of clients at the same time. That's very difficult. Stick to one thing, and then once you get pretty good with it and comfortable, you can start to add other skills eventually. And also it's also, I don't want to say you can't do those things. Like, for instance, if you're trying to, if you have a side project, and I really believe in side projects, you do have to wear a lot of hats for it to be successful if you're doing it alone. So that means you're going to be doing the UI UX design, the identity design, the front end development, any back end stuff, and the marketing. And I think just going through that process as somebody to understand what it takes, because you'll probably fail the first few times you do it, it's good to have that as well under your belt, because it will teach you a lesson. Like, this stuff is not easy, you know. If you have a great UI UX design, but maybe your code's terrible, or more typically it's the opposite. Maybe you're a great coder, but your UI, this looks horrible. Well, those are one of those things that you have to delegate out if your skills aren't up to par. And to be able to design really good, it takes years, you know. And it's just like anything. Being able to play guitar, it takes years sometimes. It's just one of those things that you have to be consistent about and patient. And as long as you understand those things up front, you can be successful.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen overnight. A lot of people
burn out because they're like, why am I not getting the results? I've been lifting weights for 6 weeks. Why am I not jacked? You know? Stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's to say, like my course, like I have a UI UX design course, it's 16 hours, and it's interactive, it's all this stuff, and it might take the average person a month or two, but you're not going to be a great UI UX designer after you take the course. And that sounds like a bad thing for me to say as somebody who wants to promote a course and I want people to buy it, but I'm being honest with you. Yeah, you can watch the course and follow along, but then you have to start putting this stuff together in your own world, and it's a lot different. So it takes a lot of practice to build that muscle memory.
And what you said about projects, like obviously if you're building a project and you're putting it out on like Reddit and you're like, look at what I built and all that stuff, you're going to have so many different disciplines. You're going to have to get some degree of exposure to so many different aspects of building something, publicizing something, right. And you just coming up with something and designing it is a whole nother series of skills. But you can have a little bit of exposure to a whole lot of concepts. It's just not that you're going to go out and bill yourself as a full stack engineer just because you put some of this stuff together for a single project. Like you said, it took you 20 plus years to build up the skills that you have to be able to actually, logo design. You were extremely deep on logo design, 2,000 logo design clients, right? Spent a great deal of time learning the theory and the practice behind identity and probably all the color theory, typography, all these different concepts that go into being a really strong logo designer and feeling confident in your work, right?
Right. Yeah. So like I said earlier, I'm not always in this mode of where I have to continually get better. Sometimes I'm more complacent than others. Sometimes I'm, really trying to learn something new hardcore. So I'm not saying it takes you 20 years to be great at UI UX design and front end development. But it's not going to happen after watching a couple full stack development courses either. It's just, like I said, it's just one of those things. And I think the best way to learn, I'm going to go back to this a little bit, is the side project idea. If you have a side project and you're excited about it, it's an idea you think can maybe work somehow. I'll give you a quick example, the guitar stuff. If anybody has ever looked at tried to learn music theory through learning scales and modes, you'll see on a Google Images, you'll see these notes mapped out on little fretboards, right, where it shows the 6 strings and stuff, and they always look pixelated and junky. And so I made this idea. I was like, what if we made this app that has an interactive guitar fretboard where it's interactive and they can quickly change. So sorry, I hit my microphone. So we made fretastic.com.
Fretastic.
And fretastic.com. And it's just like an interactive guitar fretboard service.
Oh, so this is sweet.
And so I was excited about it because I was like, there's a couple other competitors, but they're not doing it right, and it looks ugly. And so once I decided that, hey, this idea can make money, I got excited about it. And so I even though I do have a partner who's a developer on it, it will help you learn all of these things a lot easier, because then it's not a chore. You're excited about the project. That's a problem with a lot of like most courses, or almost all courses. It's hard to get excited about something else that somebody put together, through these tutorial projects or something. But if you have that excitement about some little idea, some type of tiny little SaaS, software as a service or something, that's when a lot of the stuff you will, by nature of being interested in it, you will start to learn these things. If you want to try to go this solopreneur route or try your hand at indie hacking or something like that.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a really cool project, by the way. I'll link to it in the show notes. Again, a quick reminder that we do have lots of links. If you click in the YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube video description, or if you're listening to the audio version in the in Spotify or in Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. So Fritastic, very cool. One thing that I want to talk about before we get into building skills, because I'm very excited to talk about that, is just are there any channels for publicizing your work as a designer, as a developer, that you think are underutilized or like more people should know about these? Because obviously everybody knows about like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and they may have even heard of like design places like Dribble, for example. But
Right.
What are some channels, if you will, that you can get your work out there and potentially find an audience that people may not be thinking about?
Right. So I just recently had this one idea. I haven't executed on it yet, but I'm fairly certain it would work pretty well. I've had this idea. It's like, okay, so this would be a great idea for somebody who wants to get into freelance. Like, let's just say it could be front-end development or UI UX. We'll just say like as a UI UX designer or something like that. Or maybe somebody who is even like an indie hacker almost. I mean, I noticed my wife's lactation consultant business. She's a part of a Facebook group with other lactation consultants.
Yeah.
And they're always complaining about the software. They have 2 software options that people have made for tracking your clients and all that stuff. And I guarantee you, if you go to any type of Facebook group based on any type of interest or career or whatever, you're going to find you're going to see real user feedback on the existing software or solutions that exist in there. You could promote yourself as somebody, like say for instance, maybe you're really into fitness training and you go to the gym a lot and you're also a UI UX designer. You can completely craft a business that's geared just towards that industry. And you could promote yourself potentially, on something like that, and get your name out there. I think that would be a great way, because you know what? I think one thing that's overutilized is something like Dribble probably. And it's like, I'm a designer, I'm going to put my project on Dribble, and you get 2 or 3 views out of it, and you're just lost in a sea of other people. So for me, like if you're trying to think outside of the box, developing a niche is a great way, especially, in this day and age, it's as competitive as it's ever going to be probably. And it's only going to continue that way as the internet is more, popular and such. So if you can niche down a little bit in that regard, I think that would be a great play. Just to find something that you have expertise in, like a secondary skill, like fitness or guitar. You could make band pages perhaps. You can be really good at designing band pages and promote yourself in the necessary markets where those people are frequenting. Sorry.
And there are lots of lawyers, doctors, people who run small businesses, probably people that repair washing machines and things like that.
My brother took that on. Right.
Yeah, that also are interested in bands or are interested in video games or any of these other hobbies. So a lot of times you can incidentally find people that are potential clients just within those areas. So like, for example, like when I was a developer, I'd go running through like San Francisco a lot, and so I would go to like running meetups and incidentally meet people who were interested in client work, who were just going for run, just some lawyer or something, right? So like don't I guess weed out those kinds of activities. Those, even though those may be fun for you, they may also be networking opportunities.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. You're right. You could totally just pick one industry, like I said, and like just go hard on that like try to land some like influencer clients, perhaps offered you to work for free.
Yeah.
Just if they'll use your design, like that's something that you put on proof. And like that's something I could talk about as well, is this idea that you can't do work for free.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Obviously, it's an open source community. Like a lot of the work done within FreeCodeCamp's community is done by open source contributors without any expectation of compensation, right?
Right. And so, yeah, there's this idea that, especially like for UI designers and stuff, is like don't ever work for free. And I agree with that. But what they're talking about is monetarily speaking, don't work for free. Because if you aren't making actual cash, then it's not worth it. But and there's positives and negatives to what I'm about to say. But for me, like I did work for free for a while. And doing contests is kind of like working for free if you don't win, because it's very unlikely. But I would actively, back when I was doing search engine optimization, long time ago, like 2006 or something, I would literally do design work for other website owners if they would link back to me. So like I would get backlinks. I know it's a little like gray hat SEO, but what I'm talking about in the context, like if you're a brand new designer and you don't have client work, well, you don't have a portfolio then, right? That's why some designers, they'll have a portfolio and they'll put their portfolio as one of their projects. I'm like, don't do that. You need actual work to be able to showcase and have a portfolio. So a lot of people are wondering, how do I get client work if I have no portfolio? And so one of my, like I tell my coaching clients, I say, there's a lot of ways to find clients. You might have to work for really cheap or free.
Yeah.
And the value in working for free, monetarily speaking, because you still gain something, otherwise you wouldn't do it, is in having the ability to have a project on your portfolio with a case study. And that right there is the value that you'll gain by doing something for free. And that is tremendous, because one of the main things the first thing I think that most clients and employers will look at when they hit your portfolio is not going to be your portfolio itself. It's going to be looking at your client work. So if you did something for somebody, or even a side hustle, a side project, that works as well. And you're not paying yourself, obviously.
Yeah.
You're giving yourself the ability to have client work, making sure they used it. You don't want to put something in there that they didn't end up using. It needs to be on a live website, so that you can have that trust factor for you. So working for free in that context, I have zero problem with. And some people say you shouldn't do that. It's like, well, how do you get a client? So for me, I have no problem with people working for free in that context, because they didn't work for free. They gained something out of it, and that's the opportunity to have a portfolio, which then leads to money.
Yeah, and like a counterpoint that like a lot of people might say, well, I'm like struggling to pay my rent. Like, why should I pay, work for free?
Right.
There is some degree of privilege or just having like laid a financial foundation to where, and this is why I tell people, don't quit your day job to learn to code or learn, design, or really learn anything. Always make sure you have that taken care of, even if it reduces the amount of time you have in your day that you can dedicate to improvement. It's much better to gradually learn to code over 3 years than it is to find yourself in dire straits because you bit off more than you could chew.
And I forget, a lot of times people have regular jobs, because I never did. And even when I was learning, I was like in middle school, and like I didn't have. I had like 10 years where I didn't have to worry about money. So it's easy for me to sit here and say work for free. But like you said, if you're in a situation where you have a mortgage and you have bills to worry about, don't quit your job. Find that 1 hour a night, maybe where you typically just sat and watched Netflix, and just apply it slowly but surely. You're going to learn. You'll start to develop your skills. So don't quit your day job. Only quit your day job after your side hustle now makes you enough money consistently, to quit your actual day job.
Yeah, and it should go without saying, but don't do the screw
people.
Quitting.
People have done that.
Keep those, because you never know, you might need to go back, and there's no harm in going back. There's no harm in not making it as a freelance developer this time, and having to get your old day job back, and then keep getting more at bats.
And that's
so to
why
speak.
like your service, our free code camp, is just absolutely amazing. It's probably the single source on the internet that's helped that many amount of people who perhaps, you know, they do have a job already and funds are tight. Like your courses are just insanely, you know, you have courses that are like hours upon hours long that are free. So there's no excuse for anybody to say that, oh, I don't have the money to learn this, you know, or I don't have the time. Again, I know some people are very busy, and it can be very difficult just to get an hour of time. But most people, if they're honest with themselves, they're not that busy. So it's just a matter of wanting it bad enough. And if you don't want it bad enough, don't do it. But don't make excuses, though. You're never sitting around watching Netflix all day and playing games. So I've always been a gamer as well up until like the past like 5-6 years. Like I worked in gaming as well, so it's not like I'm one of those people you have to hustle 24/7. No way.
Yeah, and same here. I enjoy games, and I enjoy relaxing with my kids and doing lots of stuff that's not work. That is not productive. It took me a while 100%. To get to a position where I had the time and bandwidth to be able to do that. But I'm proud to say that like I'm not on 24/7 because it's not sustainable.
Right. No, it's not healthy either. You're right.
Well, I want to thank you for your kind words about Free Code Camp. We're very proud to have created these free learning resources for everyone, regardless of their situation in life, their economic situation, as long as they have any sort of internet connection, even if it's a really crappy internet connection.
Right.
Like Free Code Camp's core curriculum is extremely data light, and that's by design, so that people that are out in the area where we don't have broadband, 20% of Americans don't have broadband yet in 2024. Right.
Wow.
And that says nothing about the people living in rural Asia, rural Africa, rural Latin America. Like, don't take that for granted. And we don't take that for granted. We want to make sure. But I do want to point out that we've got some excellent Gary Simon stuff on Free Code Camp's YouTube channel, including this excellent video where you go through and you essentially like critique designs. We published that way back in 2020, but I'm going to link to that in the show notes. Be sure to check those out. Learn more from Gary, see him in action. So some of the things I want to talk about in terms of getting skills. What skills should people learn in 2024? What are like the tools that you would recommend if you want to get into web design or, front end development, like hybrid kind of UX, UI design?
Right. Yeah, so you have a lot of options, fortunately. It depends on what route you want to take. So if we're talking about a website designer, or the modern term like a UI UX designer, what skills do you need and what software do you need? So I would say in terms of skills, you have to understand the fundamentals of UI design first. And that includes, and depending on who you're asking, they might say there's 5, there's 6 or 7. That's things like understanding contrast. These are in no particular order. Topography, understanding color psychology a little bit, understanding what color contrast is, understanding what alignment means in UI design, understanding what visual hierarchy, like all these fundamentals. Understand the basics first before you start trying to get into the fancy stuff. In terms of the software, well, the most popular UI UX design prototyping software is Figma, but you can also go the open source route with Penpot. They just released Penpot 2.0. That's PENPOT, and that is basically a direct Figma competitor, and they work very similarly. So if you don't want to have to spend money on Figma, which you can get a free Figma account. It's just like they have paid plans and stuff like that. If you don't want to do that, you can go the Penpot route. So if you're interested in designing websites and apps, like the actual user interfaces, those are the tools that I would recommend learning for that aspect alone. You don't get a website that works in your browser with Figma or Penpot, but that's the first thing that you typically want to work with, because you want to get an idea of what your design looks like first before you start coding. And I know that some people prefer not to do that. But my position on that is if you want to use something like Figma or Penpot, because it allows you to very quickly move things around and iterate over it and get quick ideas without having to type code first to try to design. And if you're doing a really basic cookie cutter landing page and you kind of have a quick idea of what you want, that's fine. But if you want to be a serious UI UXer, then you learn either Figma or PenPot or any of the other competitor software out there.
Yeah.
And then if you want to if we're talking about maybe front-end development, then you have two choices today. You can learn HTML and CSS from scratch in JavaScript if you want some interactivity. And I really recommend people taking the time to understand at least the basics. Or you can go the low to no code route with a tool like Framer, Webflow, Wix Studio. There's a couple other ones. There's like Dora.ai, I believe. And that's an approach where you can design your website and you can also get it up there on devices and browsers without touching code. And the ones like that I mentioned, like Framer and Webflow, they're so advanced now in the capabilities, like allowing you to create scroll-based interactions and animations, that it's a really good tool for people who just don't want to code, but they love designing. So that's an option as well.
Yeah. And so that's really cool that you're essentially presenting two paths. You can start with the design and just use power tools, essentially, like you mentioned Framer, Dora, Wix, Webflow, or you can actually learn the fundamental skills that are like basically that are going to be the output of these power tools.
Right.
They're going to output like CSS files and HTML files and JS. But if you want to focus on design first, it makes sense to go with the power tools where you can rapidly iterate and you can use that before you get into the nitty gritty.
Right. And of course, learning the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then tacking on to that, learning maybe React or Vue or something like that. You could take that route, and it's going to ultimately give you more flexibility in the end to do things from scratch. And some like larger client, higher paying projects that have specific requirements where that's only possible, that's where it's going to benefit you the most. But if you just want to frame yourself as a Webflow designer, which many people do, you can have a career out of that alone. I would be a little bit worried tying yourself to one piece of software because they can die out, but that's why, as long as you have those UI design skills, they're going to transfer easily from app to app. Because when it comes to being able to design a great looking user interface for an app or a website, it's less about the tools. It's more about your eye and and it's like a 90% / 10%. 10% tool knowledge, 90% everything else that takes a lot more longer. To
like
achieve.
The actual taste that you develop, the sense of aesthetics, right? And the creative reps that you get to be able to just come up with something that looks novel, like an artist sits in front of a blank canvas and just starts adding detail, and they've got this vision in their mind. Right. Most people, if they haven't ever done that before, they don't even know what do I paint. Where do I begin?
It's interesting because this is, I call it, I don't know if this is a real term. I call it the observer creator problem. We're all great critics, because for instance, I'll put it in the context of like guitar, because I play guitar. You can hear and anybody can recognize a great guitar solo. If a person gets one note wrong, it just stands out so bad. So we're great observers because we've listened to, we've been subjected to music for so long. But the moment you ask somebody to pick up a guitar and do a solo, even if I gave them 6 months to try to learn the Eruption solo by Van Halen, but they've never touched a
guitar solo ever, which does include at least one bum note in it, by the way.
Which one is that?
I can't remember, but he said he made a mistake when he recorded it. But this was the old days. They just like, cool, whatever. We got to get this album cut. Time is money. Like those Van Halen albums. So we're talking about Van Halen 1, the very first Van Halen album. And Eddie Van Halen, of course, legendary guitar player, just created this amazing solo that used like finger tapping, which was novel at the time. I don't think it was a widespread or well-known practice. Right. And it's just this incredible solo. But those albums, they would record them live. Like they would go in the studio and everybody would be playing. Maybe the drums would have some plexiglass or something around them. But like people just played it and they practiced so much that they could just cut an album quality version of that performance and immortalize it on the album. At least for the first 2 or 3 albums they did that. So,
Yeah. So
but he said he did actually make like a very minor mistake, but it was good enough, so they just shipped it.
Yeah, and there's some parts in that solo that are so fast, it's like it's open to interpretation. But yeah. So going back to my point, though, it's like they're not going to be able to do it in 6 months. And then you ask them to create a solo of similar caliber, you're not going to be able to do it either. And that exists because observing is very much different. Because logically speaking, wait, I can recognize that this website looks great. Now, if I try to create my own, why does it look way worse? Like, why doesn't this transfer? And it's because doing is very different. There are different neural pathways when it comes to observing. Because you can say, wow, that website looks great. And then you try to, it's like a 10 out of 10. And then you do it, it's like a 3 out of 10 as a beginner. And that's expected, though. A lot of people get tripped up like, I just suck at this. I quit, because I look at what I could produce, and they don't give themselves enough time because they don't understand upfront beforehand that you have to practice a lot and you have to bake this stuff into muscle memory. And one of the greatest ways, and this is a great parallel with guitar players and web designers, is one of the ways that I advocate to get good with a guitar and design is to simply copy others. So in guitar world, we call it covers. So I learned the Eruption Van Halen, solo, and that's called a cover. And I learned it because, well, I think it sounds great, and I want to be able to do that myself. But B, it's also going to help transfer that style into my brain so that I can interpret it and work into my own new ideas. And that's what art is. It's imitation, right? So the same concept applies to design. So like if you see a design that looks great, well, try to reverse engineer it and create it, not as something to put in your portfolio, of course, but literally copy it pixel by pixel as a practice routine. And I've done videos on this concept, and you'll find that physically, working in Figma or PenPot and recreating a design that's maybe on your other monitor or something, and you're trying to, piece it together exactly how they did it. That actually, it bakes itself into your own future work. And then so that you can eventually develop your own little style. And when it comes to UI UX design, there's a lot of patterns, so you can't really be too crazy. But you can still develop your own style and your own things that are unique, even though you're copying initially and as just a means for practice and learning.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the design trends. You did this great video a while back. Like you do this pretty frequently. Like you'll review different designs. You'll just open up your browser and you got like a bunch of tabs open, and you'll talk about it and some of the emerging trends and like developments in like motion design, for example. The cursor, like they're scrolling or they're moving the mouse and it's triggering some sort of parallax effect or uncovering something, or there's some sort of animation that progresses as you scroll. Like I'm curious about what you think like the big exciting trends in design are, and what people who are designing should look out for.
Right. Yeah. So right now, I would say in 2024, like the current trends that I'm seeing is like, well, low to no code is like getting bigger, in my opinion. Now, of course, that doesn't have anything to say with actual aesthetics. In terms of like web design trends, I try to, just for the purpose of keeping up to date and fresh on YouTube, I'll do these a couple times a year, like maybe once a year, like 2024 design trends or whatever. But typically, when it comes to UI, UX design and design trends in general, you don't see big changes in a year-to-year basis. You might have a tiny little thing that picks up like glass morphism, where people are making some of their UI cards look glassy or whatever. But in terms of the big macro trends, usually it's like a 7 to 10 year period that we see things change like largely. And what we're seeing now, in my opinion, is there's a big emphasis on interaction and motion design. And I think those things are great when you implement them where it makes sense. You don't want that stuff on an e-commerce website for your client, or if it's a content-heavy website, you don't want to have all that. But if we're talking about landing pages and portfolios, which was my personal thing that I like the most, like SaaS landing pages and stuff, and creating those type of things, then interaction and animations play a good role. And there's definitely a skill and being able to apply those with accessibility in mind and also speed and user experience in mind. There is a middle ground to, some say, just don't do anything. And if you're not good at motion design, then yeah, just keep it static. You have to spend time to learn these things because it's a skill. Just like making the website itself look good, that's a skill, like with all those fundamentals. Motion design, that's definitely a skill as well, both in terms of how you apply it with your animation timing and eases and all that stuff, but also technically how you implement it with things like GreenSock Animation Platform, or you can do some of those in a limited context within Framer and the load and no-code tools. So going back to that, so animation, interactivity is a big thing. I think typography, I'm experimenting with typography and also in getting out of flat design now, because back we had Web 2.0, which I think was 2009-ish to like 2014. Like that seems to be the window of Web 2.0, I think. I'm sure some people might disagree a little bit, but that's when, everybody was using gradients and drop shadows and strokes and glows. And everything was just like, there was very little flat, it was kind of like skeuomorphism essentially. And so then we had material design from Google came out, and that was like, oh, this is all flat. Like they're just using solid colors everywhere. And that was I think we needed that. The pendulum swung the other way into complete flat design for a while, which is great for UX. But then creativity, I believe, began to suffer a little bit. Every website almost looked the same. So now I think we're seeing a pushback against that, where we're seeing things like more colorful websites, thick strokes, and we're doing things that we typically didn't do before. And that's just a natural progression of design trends. I don't think anything major is going to happen until we get something like, the VR stuff and the AR stuff to take off. Kind of like how we did with the first iPhone. That was a fundamental change. It required a big change in how we approach design. And so until we get to that point, I'm not sure if there's going to be something else outside of that, but until we get to that point, we'll just see small incremental changes in terms of how we approach UI UX until the technology really changes and shifts.
Awesome. So in other words, if I can kind of very succinctly put what you just said, don't worry too much about it. Just focus on the fundamentals, and the ground's not shifting.
No.
Like it might seem like it's shifting. But
right.
So like learning color theory, learning typography, learning these, like where would people learn some of these? Do you cover this in some of your courses?
So I have every year I do a free UI UX design crash course and front end develop. There's two separate things, and I teach that. I always make it a point to teach that a little bit in the crash courses, so you can completely learn that stuff for free. Obviously, there's so many other sources outside of me, but my UI UX design course, which is a paid course, that covers that. There's an entire mini course dedicated to the fundamentals in that course, and I have parity pricing and all that stuff. So it's actually
parity pricing, meaning that if somebody is from a low income country, then they can.
And it'll knock off like 40%. But
that's cool. Awesome. Well, we can put a link to that below as well if anybody wants to try out that course. And what do you think about some of the AI tools? You had this great video that I watched where you were looking at some of Framer's AI tools. And I think maybe they use the term AI a little liberally when it sounds, but what is AI really? We've had AI since, early chess engines and things like that. But obviously generative AI tools coming up with quote unquote creative stuff from whole cloth and things like that. What do you think about those AI tools? Are there any that have really impressed you?
Right. Yeah. So of course the one that's really impressed everybody is when Midjourney came out, just for generating images. And the main use case that I see that being used, and it's integrated into my workflow, because I will use Midjourney to create assets, whereas otherwise in the past I might have used something like unsplash.com, which is like a free image, resource. These are actual photographs that humans took. And what's really cool is like the prompt that you issue within Discord to interact with Midjourney, and it just keeps getting better and better. I'm able to quickly generate an asset like an abstract website background, like some type of weird gradient or something, and so you just have really fun experimenting with it, and you can get some really good results with it, realistic or otherwise, if you want them in any style. So that Midjourney, I use that a lot. I also would advocate using Adobe Illustrator's a relatively new vector-based AI prompt generation platform. It's really cool because before we couldn't get vector-based AI assets, but now you can do that. Of course, you could do that if you did the what do you call the bitmap to vector process, but
yeah, but
usually
that was always pretty bad.
That's artifacts.
Right?
Yeah, you get artifacts. It'd be tough to do.
So,
correctly.
and just for the benefit of the audience, when we say vector, we're talking about like an SVG file or something where it's like geometry as opposed to, pixels.
Right. Yeah. So like if you, a good way to describe the difference between like a raster graphic or like a bitmap graphic and a vector graph is if you zoom up on a photograph that you take on your phone, like you'll see pixelation, blurriness. It doesn't look like good quality. That's rastered. Vector doesn't have that. But vector, of course, you don't use vector for like high resolution photographs. You use it for like illustrations and stuff. And on websites, you have icons. You have little illustrations sometimes. And Adobe Illustrator's vector AI generation tool is pretty solid depending on what you're trying to get it to generate.
So let's say hypothetically I wanted to have like a quill. I want to have some old timey, Renaissance era, kind of Baroque music website. Actually,
right.
It's a different musical period. But let's say that I want to have leave a note in the guest book or something like that. And I want to have a quill. Like I could go to Adobe and essentially prompt it like, hey, I need a vector graphic of a quill and it should be tilted n degrees and it should be, it should have ink dripping from it. Or something like that.
So I would use that. Yeah, and and it'll come out like 4 variations, and sometimes it's bad, and sometimes it's really good, and they allow you to specify different styles. So I would use that. Not as much as I use Midjourney, because there's already like in icons, there's already so many icons that are very well designed, and you can't really get good icons.
It's like a website I've used. I don't know if you have something better than that you'd recommend.
I can't. I'm not off the top of my head these days.
Yeah.
But so those are 2 like graphic-based tools I would use AI for. But I would also use ChatGPT and LLMs for in general. And that could be as simple as like trying to get website copy. That's the obvious one. So you're not using lorem ipsum everywhere. But also to come up with ideas like perhaps even you don't want to rely on these large language models too much, like for like research, the research aspect of like UX design, but it's certainly a tool that's available for you to help assist you when you're trying to build a website or something, even if it's a technical question or not. So as a front-end developer, you can ask ChatGPT questions, but just understand that it does get things wrong, at times. But if you have basic questions, it's a great resource. And I use it every day.
Yeah.
I use it to learn a little bit of music theory, and you can ask it questions that are, as long as they're general basic questions, you're not asking it to make like a Facebook clone, you're good to go typically. So that's the main ways right now that I personally use AI in my UI UX workflow.
Awesome. Well, we've covered so much ground here. I do have a question that I want to ask you. You've often said that you live fearlessly. What does that mean? And why is it that you've chosen to live fearlessly?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not sure when I said that specifically, but I'll give you a really good, I'll give you an answer that makes sense to me because it kind of aligns with, like a recent, I guess you could say, transformation of my thought process and how I approach stuff in general. For me, I guess I finally understood that, I was a hypochondriac. And so I was always worried about like health ailments, and which is really stupid because I was an alcoholic. It's like, why are you drinking alcohol every night when you're worried about your health or whatever? And then finally, slowly, I shed that because I started going down this rabbit hole. I know this is completely off topic, but of near-death experiences. And I chose to believe these people that are having these near-death experiences, and that's like one of the greatest things that's ever happened to them. Like 95% of them say it's like the greatest thing ever. You know what? I decided to stop worrying about my health because, A, I'm pretty healthy now. You know, I don't drink anymore, and I run and lift a lot. But even like as recently as 2 years ago, like I was just worried about, you know, like if I had one small thing wrong with me health-wise, it's because I have cancer or I have this or that. And I finally stopped that, and I don't have hypochondria anymore. And because I believe, you know, when I die, it's going to be, it's going to be a continuation of my consciousness. And so what I'm finding now is that I am living life in less fear in general, just by having that mantra in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just going to die and rot there in the ground and that's it. That gives me comfort. And so I understand atheists might be like, ugh, you know, because I was an atheist, and I'm still kind of am, but I'm more spiritual now. So I don't subscribe to his particular religion. But for me, like I said, I live life fearlessly now in that context of where I'm not stressing over everything, because I think this is just for me just to better myself on this time in the planet. And so that's what that my new mantra is that. So. Hopefully that was a sufficient answer.
No, awesome, man.
It's different than what you're expecting.
I mean, congratulations on stopping drinking. I'm very outspoken about the fact that I haven't had a drink since my daughter was born, you know, 8+ years ago. And
awesome.
I have no intention of ever drinking again. I love just being in the moment, present, unadulterated. And, you know, overcoming hypochondria, like that can be absolutely paralyzing. Congratulations to you for figuring out a way to like, push past that and be able to live your life, man.
Right.
Yeah. It's been such an amazing experience learning from you, both about like freelancing, design, and of course, just your ridiculous work ethic and how you've been so productive over the past 20 years. Again, I encourage everybody to learn from this guy. I've learned a lot from him. I enjoy just be sure to watch his video of him playing guitar. Just great, great video production. And I'm very excited when I make it out there. I'm going to hang out at your studio.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you have like a Fender P bass or something like that, like I'll just grab the bass and let's jam. Cause
let me tilt the camera real quick.
Yeah, let's
Hopefully
check it out. Let's check it out. All right. So I'm just going to verbally describe what we're seeing. We're looking at a wall. For anybody listening to the audio edition.
Something popped up on my screen. It's like something about the internet connection.
Okay. No, it seems fine. Whoa, dude. I mean, you've got like those Fearless Flyer style guitar stands that like just hold your guitar in position so you don't have to use a strap. You've got like a full-blown movie theater looking thing. And you've got
that's a big screen back there.
Yeah. I mean, it's how tall is the ceiling in there? It's probably at least like 15 feet.
It is 16 feet.
16 feet. Yeah, it's just giant studio. It's amazing. Beautiful,
there you go. Let me get this
ornate
back
wallpaper. Yeah.
I might be like tilted.
Yeah. So, Gary, it's been such an amazing experience. We even got a preview of the studio, which you'll see a lot more of if you subscribe to Gary's website.
To
his YouTube.
Studio. Yep.
Definitely do that. I'll have a link to that. And yeah, man, it's been a pleasure to talk with you for the past 2 hours. Get such a huge injection of insight from you, man.
You as well. Yeah, this has been one of the kind of like a bucket list thing to have an interview with Quincy Larson, which is awesome. So yeah, I enjoyed it very much. So
awesome, man. Well, everybody who's listening, hope you have a fantastic week. Until next week, happy coding.